In a world where mammoths roamed the frozen tundra and cave lions hunted in coordinated packs, early humans lived on the razor's edge of survival. There was no guaranteed shelter, no steady supply of food, and danger lurked around every corner. But between ancient bones and long cold fire pits, a surprising story begins to take shape. A story not of constant death, but of endurance, of age, of survival well beyond what we imagine. We've long assumed that prehistoric life was short and brutal, and to an extent, it was. Yet recent research reveals that some ancient humans lived far longer than we typically believe, sometimes even reaching ages we now consider elderly. Let's uncover the truth about how long our ancestors really lived. To understand prehistoric longevity, we first need to clear up a common misconception: the meaning of life expectancy. When we hear that people in ancient times had a life expectancy of 30 years, we tend to assume that most died around that age. But that's not quite accurate. What this number often reflects is the average life expectancy at birth, a statistic that's heavily influenced by infant mortality. In regions with poor medical care, even today, high child mortality can pull average life expectancy well below 60. But those who survive the perilous early years often live nearly as long as those in wealthier nations. The same was true in prehistory. If a child made it past the age of 5 or 10, their chances of reaching adulthood and even old age increased dramatically. Anthropologists have frequently cited a life expectancy of 20 to 35 years for prehistoric humans. But again, this is largely due to infant and childhood death. In fact, fossil evidence shows clear signs of aging in many individuals' worn teeth, arthritic joints, and even spinal degeneration. These were not the bodies of the young. So how old did people actually get? A study of 12 traditional societies across 4 continents offers key insights. 5 lived entirely by hunting and gathering. 4 combined that with horticulture, and the rest had adopted some modern practices while retaining foraging roots. The findings? Roughly 63% of children survived to age 15, and 68% of those reached 45. Among the most traditional groups, life expectancy at birth ranged from 21 to 37 years. But those who made it to 45 often lived another 14 to 24 years, with many reaching their 60s. The most common age of death among adults in these groups, what statisticians call the mode, was 72 years. That's shockingly close to the average in many industrialized nations today. Of course, not everyone was so lucky. Many still died young due to disease, injury, or violence. A study of foraging communities found that 70% of deaths were caused by disease, 20% by accidents or violence, and only 9% from degenerative aging. Interestingly, infectious diseases, the kind that devastate modern populations, were almost absent in newly contacted forager groups. Why? Their small, mobile lifestyles didn't allow viruses to thrive or spread. The lives of Aboriginal Australians offer a rare window into prehistoric survival. Despite high infant mortality and frequent interpersonal conflict, historical accounts describe elders reaching 70, 80, and even 90 years of age without access to modern medicine. They lived physically demanding lives, ate natural foods, and were supported by strong kinship networks. While they're not direct proxies for Paleolithic humans, their histories show what was possible under similar conditions. Across traditional societies, the elderly aren't viewed as burdens but as vital sources of knowledge and wisdom. Among the Inuit of the Arctic, elders teach skills like animal tracking and weather interpretation. In the Amazon, Shipibo shamans serve as healers of both body and spirit. In Aboriginal communities, councils of elders settle disputes through ancient laws. Even when they're no longer physically productive, elders are revered, cared for, and integrated into social life. But what about those cultures where old age meant abandonment? In times of extreme hardship, Some cultures practice geronticide, the killing or abandonment of the elderly. Among the Inuit, there are tales of elders choosing to remain behind during harsh winters to preserve resources for the young. Similar stories come from drought-stricken regions of Africa and Australia. While heartbreaking, these were often voluntary sacrifices, deeply rooted in love and survival, not cruelty. However, in rare cases, geronticide was forced. The Aruli, a Germanic tribe, reportedly executed elders as part of ritual. But such acts were exceptions, not the norm, especially among hunter-gatherers, who typically showed remarkable compassion for their aged. We now turn the clock back 2 million years to Homo erectus, an early human ancestor. In the Georgian site of Dmanisi, archaeologists unearthed 5 skulls and skeletal remains from a diverse ancient population. One skull, Skull 4, or the Old Man of Dmanisi, stood out. He had lost all but one tooth, and his jawbone showed that he'd lived years without being able to chew. He couldn't eat raw meat or plants. Without help, survival would have been impossible. Yet he lived, which means others must have fed him, cared for him, and kept him safe. For a creature once thought to live fast and die young, this was revolutionary. His estimated age? Around 40. For Homo erectus, that was elderly. Could some Homo erectus individuals have lived to 60 or 70? It's possible. Chimpanzees can live up to 60 in the wild and even 80 in captivity. Gorillas and orangutans have reached similar ages. So while rare, longer lifespans among Homo erectus weren't impossible. Estimates suggest that about 10% of them reached 30, and 5% reached 50. Calculating from age 15 rather than birth would likely reveal an even higher percentage of long-lived individuals. Neanderthal's closest extinct relatives offer even more insight. Despite their tough lives, many lived into middle or old age. One famous case is Shanidar, found in Iraq. He had a crushed skull, a useless arm, degenerative joint disease, hearing loss, and poor vision. He could no longer hunt or gather. Yet he lived into his 40s or 50s because others protected him, fed him, and stood by him. His survival is a testament to Neanderthal empathy and perhaps the earliest example of prehistoric healthcare. Shanidar wasn't alone. In France, another Neanderthal skeleton showed signs of severe tooth loss, yet he also lived for years afterward. Cro-Magnon I, a modern human from 30,000 years ago, had neurofibromatosis and severe arthritis. Despite these conditions, he lived into his 40s or 50s and was buried with care, suggesting a deep social bond. It's easy to imagine early humans dying young, devoured by predators or felled by disease, and many did. But for those who made it through the brutal early years, old age was not unusual. They aged with wrinkles, ailments, and limitations just like us. But they also aged with dignity, surrounded by those who valued their wisdom, stories, and presence. The myth that humans rarely lived past 30 in prehistory is just that, a myth. Ancient people grew old, loved, taught, and were remembered. And that perhaps is the most human truth of all. Subscribe to Prehistoric Shadows for more truths buried in time.